So I really do coming. Before I get started talking about the one-room schools of Upper Allen, I want to ask you a question. How many of you either came to the last presentation or you saw it online? Okay, quite a few of you. I have an update. Not much of one, but a little bit. And that's how history is written sometimes, a little bit at a time. If you remember this, the case of the physician's missing wife, I talked about a fellow by the name of Samuel Long. He was a doctor and he had been married during the year. And through research, I found out the name of his wife, the name of the child, but I couldn't find where they were in 1850. But guess what? I still don't know where they are. Just as a reminder, Samuel Long was age 24, living in Pennsylvania, married within the year, a physician, and he had parents. The father's name was Philip. The reason I bring up Philip's name especially is because in doing some other research, and again, that's how a lot of history is discovered. It literally is just, you're looking for one thing and you find something else. I found in Mechanicsburg, according to Ancestry.com, a Samuel Lang. I looked at the document, which is what you have to do. It's Samuel Long, 24, Pennsylvania, a physician living with a brother named Philip. It's got to be the same person. I mean, I can't be 100% sure, but I'm certainly close enough that I'm going to say it's the same person. Still have no idea where the wife is. But the big question is, why is he in two different censuses at the same time? That's not supposed to happen. So as I said, I don't have much of an update, but I want to at least share that with you. I'll keep looking. By the way, when we teach, and I taught for 35 years, when we teach, we try to simplify and simplify and simplify to the point where it'll really make sense and kids will understand it. But the reality is that that's not what history is. History is really pretty messy, which is one of the reasons why I like it. Anyway, let's turn our attention now to the one-room schoolhouse, and we'll ring the bell and get started. And I'll be talking tonight about the one-room schoolhouses of Upper Allen Township. Most of the pictures and references I have are of Upper Allen, but I do have a couple others to make a point. By the way, I need to let you know, Philadelphia born and raised. I did go to the Allen School, but this particular school was named after Ethan Allen, and as you can see, it was not a one-room schoolhouse. If it sits on Battersby Street, I don't know if any of you know Philadelphia at all. If you come over the Tacony-Palmyra Bridge, which is the bridge that separates Philadelphia from civilization. I'm sorry, never mind, I didn't say that. Anyway, this is where I had my start. Give you a little bit of a background. Schools as we know it today actually start with a law that was passed by the Pennsylvania legislature in 1834. We were not the first state to have common schools. We were not the last state. We were somewhere in the middle. That introduced free public education in Pennsylvania. There certainly was education in Pennsylvania prior to that. If you had a child that you thought was precocious and might want to be a doctor or a lawyer or a minister, they probably would have gone to some place like the Cumberland Valley Institute, which was located in downtown Mechanicsburg. Would have cost quite a bit of money back in those days, and most people couldn't afford it. Your other alternative, if you want your child to learn the basics, was to send them to what was called a dame school. And that was called because basically they were run by women, and the women would gather kids around the kitchen table, or in this case, the outdoor table. And by the time she was done with them, they would learn to read and write and do simple arithmetic. For the average person back in the time of the colonial period, that was probably enough, and probably more than most people had. But as I said, in 1834, the legislature understood that in order to become a progressive society, and remember, we were just starting the industrial age at this point. We couldn't just sit back and have illiterate people. We wanted people who were trained, that could benefit society. And so they passed the law. It wasn't always popular. Some people just didn't like the fact that you had to spend money. Others didn't like the fact that we were Americanizing everybody. But it went through and proved to be fairly popular. If you remember in the last session, I told you that one of the questions they asked in 1850 was, if this person was over 21, could they read and write? And most people could. So that was proof they were offering that the law was working, not only in Pennsylvania, that was a national. What this bill said was that each legal entity, and a legal entity as they defined it was really what we would call a township or a town or a borough or a city, somebody who could elect officers and raise taxes, that each legal entity was a school district. And that each school district had to have a board of education, and that board of education had to determine how children would be educated for that legal entity. In Pennsylvania, there were 6,000 school districts. People complain there's too many with 500 today. 6,000 is what they started with. Here's a map of what is now the Mechanicsburg Area School District. And you'll notice Mechanicsburg, Sharmanstown, and Upper Allen. Those were 3 separate school districts. If you move next door to Cumberland Valley, you had Hampton Township, Silver Springs, Middlesex, and Monroe, 4 separate school districts. They all joined together as Cumberland Valley. The 3 that you see pictured here joined together as Mechanicsburg. When schools started, you had to walk to school. There was no other way. First of all, there weren't any cars. And it was, if you look at this, you can understand quite clearly, it was uphill both ways. I interviewed about 40 different people for this particular project, and I asked each of them about the killer mountain goat. Nobody could remember that. And I know this is true because I downloaded this from the internet. Geographically, 2 of the areas in the Mechanicsburg area were fairly small. You could put a school in the middle, and they did. As a matter of fact, in the beginning, Mechanicsburg had 2 schools in the beginning. They had the Locust Street School, and they had the Arch Street School. Sharmanstown had 1 when it came into existence in 1874, and that's the old Sharmanstown School. If you look at the map again, you can start in the middle, put the school there, and have kids walk from the edge of Mechanicsburg, Sharmanstown, even better. If you try that with Upper Allen, you'd have a problem. It would take as long to get to school as it would. By the time they got there, it'd be time to go home. What happened is that Upper Allen made the decision to do what most schools did, or most townships did. And that's that they subdivided the area into smaller districts. And if you're as ADD as I am, you stop listening to me because you're counting the stars. How many are there? 9 stars, okay. You're self-identifying, you realize that. And that's exactly what they did. The map that I took this from had the schools labeled. I put the stars on it just to make it a little easier to see tonight. But they subdivided themselves into 9 areas, and that's where the 9 schools come from. According to tradition, and I'm saying it that way, there are people who say there's a law, but nobody's been able to show me one, and I haven't found it, that said schools have to be no more than 3 miles apart. That way, if you're in the middle, it's only 1.5 miles, only 1.5 miles to walk to school in the morning. And that still seems a lot on a country road, but they did it. As I said, there were 9 schools. You notice the 2 in black, the Allendale School and the Mount Allen School. Those both closed early. Allendale in 25 and Mount Allen in 1924. School board minutes don't really tell me why they closed, but I assume there just were not enough children there to support it. So they closed those schools and those kids had to move to the remaining 7. And the remaining 7, you'll notice, are in existence until 1953. And that's when the one-room schools closed for good in Upper Allen. Some of the schools either went by separate names, in other words, they changed the name, or they were separate buildings. The only one I'm sure of is the Cedar Hill School. That closed in 1909. I know where that is. The foundation is there, but the school is long gone. It was a stone school, and they built a new Bowmansdale School at that point. And they were about a mile, or not a mile, they were about a quarter of a mile from each other. I'm not sure about Lance's or Pleasant Grove, but I know the current names are Glen Allen and Graham's. Today, 2 of them are no longer there. The Mount Allen School and Shepherdstown. Shepherdstown was in bad shape in 1953. They just tore it down. They sold the land. They didn't sell the building. Mount Allen, I don't know what happened to it. If you read Paul Miller's account, he said it burned down, but I can't check that, so I can't be 100% sure. If you knew Paul Miller, you knew he had his ear pretty close to the ground. It probably is true, but I can't prove that it's true. The others are either private homes, or in the case of Bowmansdale, Bowmansdale was a Oddfellows home, meeting place up until a couple of years ago. Now it's a meeting hall or an event venue. The Graham School, the Grahams you probably are familiar with. You drive past that all the time. If you know where the Sheets is, going out of Market Street, and then there's a church, and then there's the insurance agency. The insurance agency was a one-room schoolhouse. I'll show you a picture of that later. And I'd be willing to, how many of you have been to Little Theater? Okay, yeah, you've been in a one-room schoolhouse then. That was the old Kohlertown School. Spent a lot of time in the state archives, although they didn't have nearly as much as they would have liked. The state archives had mainly tax records from Upper Allen. I'm not sure why they went to the state, not to the new school district, but they did. And they are available and you're able to see them. Interesting names, but you know, they didn't tell me much about the school itself, but they did have 2 monthly reports. If you've taught, you know what a plan book is and a record book. That's basically what these are, except they were huge. And you had to take them with you every month. By the way, if you were a teacher, you had to take them every month to the school board meeting. A school board member would look over it, would sign it, and you would get your paycheck. If you didn't go to the school board meeting that month, you didn't get your paycheck that month. Now, you would get it the next month or the month after that. I found somebody who didn't get it for 3 months. I want to make a couple of points with these. I have one for Pleasant Grove and one for Center Square. If you see LL or AH, that means it's a male. That was just common in that period of time, that men went by their initials professionally. At Pleasant Grove, Jesse Asper is a male. Frances Swope, though, is a female. So out of the list there was only 1 female. Everybody talks about the old school marm. I have a highlight by Jesse Asper's name, if you'll notice, because I'm going to mention him again later. So just remember that name. If you look at Center Square, you'll notice again, mainly males at the beginning, then they hire a female, Laura, either Keeney or Cooney, I couldn't tell by the handwriting. Then they hired, after 2 years, Flora Schwartz, another female. And by the way, she was replaced by Flora Rupp. Isn't it interesting, same first name? More interesting is the fact that it was the same handwriting. So it's the same person. And now you know why she could only teach under that name for 2 years. She got married and she had to leave. We don't make that mistake anymore. And then replaced by Nora Landis a couple years later. Board minutes told me a lot more. And by the way, I have the board minutes for the Upper Allen School District from 1878 on until 1964 when they go out of existence. They're in the archives. They are available if anybody would like to look at them. I've read them. They're hard to read. If you read cursive, they're still hard to read, but I do have a magnifying glass for you. It helps. What the board minutes for 1878 of June told me was there were 9 schools and they operated for 6 months a year. The Allendale School would be visited by the entire board on Saturday to see if the building could be repaired. It was in bad shape. And so they had physically, the board met there and they made the decision, and then they came back and they fixed it. It could be repaired, by the way. They told me that in a later board minute. And teachers would be paid, I hope you're not upset with this, the whopping sum of $35 a month for 6 months. I'm sorry? Usually October to April. I hope that's 6. I didn't count that before I said it, but it would have been, sometime September and then getting out early. They like to keep the kids home to work on the farm, at least till the crops were out, and they wanted them out again so that the planting could start and they could become part of that. We were a farming community, as was much of the United States at that point. Board minutes told me more. They told me that the schools would be operated for 6 months of the year. Available to visit, I'm sorry, I'm redoing this. I just want to make the point that that's $210 a year that they made. 2 months later, they announced who their starting lineup was. This is who would be teaching in the school for the year. And again, you'll notice Miss Katie up here and Miss Lyda down here, the only 2 females. Schools are mainly, by the way, male dominated. The only times they were not male dominated was the period around the Civil War, for obvious reasons, for the same reason around World War I, and then it changes back to females, or male dominated, and then again around World War II, but it never changes back after World War II. So many more women. I did a study of the schools in this area and found out that almost all of the elementary teachers of Mechanicsburg area are female. Overwhelmingly, it's not all, 90% maybe. Now, if you get to the middle school and the high school, it's about 50-50. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Upper Allen was run by a school board. You might recognize the name Strock. That's big in this area. Interestingly enough, I'm doing a research project on a photograph that was given to me by the Strock family of the class of 1911. It's one of the few pictures I have of an entire class. There were only about less than 20 in it. Everybody's named, so I can tell who everybody is in the picture. That's rare. So I have that, and I'm doing a research project on it, and that'll be a small article for the alumni and what happened to them. But it said here that G. Ware Strock was the re-elected president. I was really impressed when I saw this. Claire Hoppel was named vice president. I thought, well, isn't that progressive? Then I did some more research and found out Claire was a guy married to somebody named Mary. They had a couple kids. He was a farmer in the area. Now, the school board, remember, we're talking the beginning where there are no administrators, there's no principals. So the school board had to do it all. Have any of you been on a school board? Jim, I know you have. Anybody else been on a school board? Or okay. You actually did all the interviewing as a school board member. You went in and observed the classes and observed the students as a school board. Now, you didn't have to be there every day, but you were supposed to be in, every teacher was supposed to be observed by a school board member once a month. Yeah. And by the way, the plan book also listed who the visitors were, so you could tell who came in and when they came in. And they were in charge of maintenance of the school. We already saw that with the Allendale School. And they set the policy, set the budget, and paid the bills. Well, that's what the board does today, but they had to do a whole lot more then, a whole lot more in-house anyway. Members of the school board finally received some help in 1854 when the state of Pennsylvania passed a law that said they were going to create something called the Office of County Superintendent. Now, this would have been the superintendent for the entire county. It was an elected position. It was one of the teachers, actually, who rose up through the ranks and became the superintendent. And he was to do the observing. Now, he was supposed to be in every classroom once a year. He would not have gone into a building like Carlisle or Mechanicsburg. They had their own principals at this point. But in the beginning, they certainly would have gone into Upper Allen and some of the other areas. Not only did they observe the teachers and make recommendations for improvement, but they had to run the Teacher Institute and they had to evaluate the students. And I'll give you an example of that a little bit later. The Teacher Institute, by the way, was held every year between Christmas and New Year's. There was no break for the teacher. They had one of two choices: attend the County Institute, and it was voluntary, or be in the classroom teaching. Guess which one your kids wanted you to do? If you said you weren't going to the Institute, they would have been a little unhappy with you. Finally, in 1915, Upper Allen appoints a principal. His name was George Berkheimer, and I have his picture in one of the books I have up here. He had his own building, by the way. He was a teacher at Shepherdstown and then later a teacher in the Bowmansdale School. So it wasn't like a principal today. He actually was a full-time teacher. And by the way, he would gather you after school and lead the meetings. But that was George Berkheimer. George Berkheimer, by the way, lived a quarter of a mile up the road. If you make a right, and you know where the open field is by the church? It's across, I guess, across from, it's across from the medical center there and Catty Corner, and across from the Chick-fil-A. There's an open field there. That's where his house was up until fairly recently. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Davises owned it at that point. So bought it. Yeah. Interestingly enough, he worked in Bowmansdale and didn't have a car. They had to walk to and back every day. In interviewing, somebody told me that they remembered on an icy day, the roads were icy, he was walking down and he fell, and the kids were wondering where he was. So they went out looking for him and carried him back, and he taught all day and then walked home. How do they spend their money? I know you can't read this, so I blew part of it up for you. It was a good year last year, $250 left over. You got money from the state and appropriations. You took in money from tuition, people who might want to send their child to Upper Allen. Money from local taxes, and that's what the duplicate is, some left over from last year and some this year, and some interest income. So it was a little less than $5,000 you had to operate on. Here's what they spent the money on. If you know anything about schools, we're very labor intensive. Salaries are the big expense, both then and now, almost $3,000 out of the $5,000. But you also had to have money to heat the place, to clean the place. By the way, that was $30 a year. They only cleaned it once a year. At the end of the year, they did a real deep clean. They hired somebody to come in and do that. They sent money to the Teacher Institute, et cetera, et cetera. And again, you can see what some of these things are. Though it's interesting, they had money set aside to send the superintendent to a convention, but they didn't have a superintendent. That must have been the county superintendent. They're probably pitching in for that. Not everything went well for the school board. Here's an example of an article that I found about tramps who broke into the Allendale School. Poor Allendale School. They seem to be having lots of problems. They broke into there, did a lot of damage. And what I like about it is the comment at the end: this is the fourth time during the present session that this has occurred, but the house is in such a condition that it's an easy matter to break into, and the school board should see that it's more secure. That's from Perry County. And here's another example of them breaking in and stealing the coal. Can you imagine going in the morning and you can't heat the place? Talk a few minutes about school construction. Did you ever notice how schools all look alike? The one-room schools, you can tell. They've got the roof. They have the porch. Whoops. Well, anyway, what I was going to point out is that The old one went up the hill. When the Gardners bought the place, they took and built a basement. And if you go into the basement today, it's a real nice boardroom and there's some storage area. And then they put the old one-room schoolhouse on top of it. So it's a little larger today. Or it's a little different orientation, plus a much larger basement. One of the things that remains, and I talked to Seth Gardner about this, is all the chalk that's on the outside of it, where the kids, we have a school teacher here, clapping the erasers. You've been here for a while, Chris. And they used to hit it against the wall, and that's what took the chalk out of the board so that they could have clean erasers for the next day. The teacher could have clean erasers for the next day. Seth said, he said we could clean that off easily, but it's part of the building. I like that. One of the reasons the schools look so much alike was because of this particular manual that came out. And I do have a copy of it with the books there on the one-room schoolhouses. It was a book on how to build and maintain schools. And it was sent to every school board. You could build a one-room school, a two-room school, a four-room school, or an eight-room school. If you remember the old part of the Simpson Street building, that's an eight-room building. Four on the bottom, four on the top. That was published in 1885. And from then on, a lot of schools started to look very much alike because they followed those plans. They didn't have to, but it was there and it was free and it told you everything you needed to do. Not all of them are exactly alike, and I'm going to show you some today. This is probably the newest. I'm sorry, this is one of the newer ones. You'll notice this doesn't have 3 windows, it has 4. It's a little larger and it doesn't have the porch in the front, it has the vestibule. This is probably the newest of the one-room schoolhouses that I'm going to show you. And the reason it's new is because it's a replacement. And I need to tell you the story about this. This is up in Schuylkill County, up in Pine Grove Township. Apparently the teacher was hired in the middle of the year and it was cold. So when you go into the building in the middle of the year, what do you have to do? Start the fire. That was step 1. Step 2 was to call the fire company. Step 3 was to figure out where she was going to teach the kids after that. They did rebuild, and this is what it looks like today. It had been a storage area for the Girl Scouts because it sits right at the end of property that's owned by the Girl Scouts of America, and they were using it for storage, and then it was purchased by the local historical society up in Schuylkill County, and they're refurbishing it now as a one-room schoolhouse. And it is currently the only one-room schoolhouse museum in Schuylkill County, or at least I've been told that. I only put this in because of the name. Anybody have any idea? Anybody go to Shippensburg University? Okay, this sits on the campus of Shippensburg University. Yeah, it was a school in Franklin County actually, and they moved it to the campus. And we have in the back of the room the former curator of that building. You want to wave your hand? I will get in so much trouble when I get home for that. She still loves me. Oh well. And there's always one that's a little different. This is in Chester County, and the reason I put this one in is because I just love it. It's the oldest one. It's a stone building. The reason it has 8 sides is because no matter where the sun is, unless it's behind a cloud, you can get some light in the building. Buildings did not have electricity until later. About the 1930s, the electricity came in. I also wanted to put this one in. Doesn't this look like a typical one-room schoolhouse? It's not. This is in Shepherdstown. If you know where it is, it's directly across York Street from the hotel. Everybody tells me they know where the one-room schoolhouse in Shepherdstown is. It's torn down. I hope they don't know where it is. It's with Jimmy Hoffa. But it certainly looks like it. It was built using the plans of a one-room schoolhouse. It was built as a church. It was a union church, similar to the one in downtown Mechanicsburg. And it was to temporarily hold congregations. It was never to have a full-time minister or a full-time congregation. They were to come in for a period of time and then build their own church. I don't know how well that worked. I haven't read that much about it. It also was served as a community center, and of course today is a house. Wanted to show you the inside of the buildings. I really wanted to make the point about Miss Clarabelle, who's standing in the back, because her car was sitting outside the one-room schoolhouse that I was going to comment on. But there she is, Clarabelle Gotchall. And you'll notice that this is a last day of school, according to Sophie Bickle. And this is Sophie, who showed me who gave me this picture. And you'll notice the rapt attention. Now, these two are doing something. I'm not quite sure what, but they're right in front of the teacher. And by the way, in one-room schools, collaborative learning was very important. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, but so they're probably doing something they should be. Here's another inside, Mr. Marks, in his classroom. And these kids look a little older. I know there was an attempt at one point to have a junior high, and this might have been it. We brought all the kids together that were of that age rather than having them in 8 separate rooms, so that when they transitioned to high school, they wouldn't feel as bad. Again, a typical classroom. This is the Shepherdstown School, 1952, Mary Catherine Long. And I wanted to point a couple things out in this picture. One, you'll notice the jar here. No indoor plumbing, which meant no water. So a kid had to go and get water in the morning and bring it back and fill it. And then that was the water they had for the day. Some people said, oh yeah, we all brought our own cups in. Others said, oh no, we only had one cup. We all drank out of the same one. And of course the rope was what the teacher used to call the students in for the beginning of the day, to call them in at the end of recess and the end of lunch. I like this picture. This is not of Upper Allen. This is Silver Springs Township School District. Frank Hare is the teacher. And I pulled this one because of the one-room stove. Again, this is one I pulled off the internet, but I wanted to show you what a school library would look like. And that was it. Sometimes the teacher was hired, by the way, based on what books they could bring to the classroom. I also wanted to show you this. This is the bench. And the bench plays a very important role, not for discipline, but for teaching. Remember, you've got 8 different classrooms at one time in the same classroom. To make that point, I wanted to show you this picture. When I first looked at this picture, by the way, oh, there's the teacher. Then I realized, no, this is Mr. Hutchinson. He's down here. This kid is probably in 8th grade. He's a big 8th grader. But then you look over here, some of these could be 8th graders or 7th graders, but then look down here. The teacher, and this one, the teacher not only had to deal with one class, but had to deal with 8. And so they had to be fairly well organized. The day was very structured. Here's what it would look like after opening exercises. And to give you an example, I'm going to use math and grade 1. You would pull the first graders up. Now the teacher would do what all good teachers do today. They review what you did yesterday to make sure they understood it. They had an assignment, so let's go over that assignment. They either understand it or they don't. If they don't understand it, then you have more teaching to do. If they do understand it, then you can teach new material. Once you've taught the material, you give them an assignment and you send them back to their seats. And by the way, when they're back there, you're pulling another class up, which means that those kids can't be asking you questions during the day. You're busy, you're teaching. And so they really needed to find somebody else to show them what to do. If you were confused, you asked. Ask somebody in your class, or the grade above it, or the grade above that. So as I said, there was a lot of collaborative learning going on. You did first grade, then second grade, then third grade. Hopefully, if your day works perfectly, you did 4 grades and took a recess break. And then you did another 4 and took a lunch break. If you ever taught, you know that never happens. Nothing ever goes perfectly, but sometimes it gets close. If you do math in the morning, you do something else in the afternoon, one of the other disciplines that you were required to teach. And again, I'll show you some of those later. Here's another picture, and you see the teacher with the over here teaching to the kids on the, and these look like about what, 3rd grader maybe? And you'll notice these kids over here are all doing what they should be. If you've ever been a teacher, I have no clue, and I probably don't want to know. I brought in some report cards. I have report cards that go back, and I tried to pull cards from Upper Allen that were from 2nd or 3rd grade. So you can see that a 2nd or 3rd grader would have had graded on attendance and conduct, but also reading, grammar, spelling, arithmetic, penmanship, history. So there was a lot for a teacher to do. By the way, you'll notice the teacher was Goggenauer. I had mentioned him before. Here's one a little bit later, 1900. And I like this one because not only does it tell me what the student had, spelling, reading, penmanship, written arithmetic, mental arithmetic, geography, and drawing, but it also tells me the things they did not have. So if you didn't have it in 1st or 2nd grade, you certainly would have had it by 7th or 8th. That includes, by the way, composition and algebra and grammar. Here's another report card. This is a little bit later, and again, you can get an idea of what they had. And here's one from 1953. By the way, the teacher is Mrs. Gutschall, who I mentioned earlier. The interesting enough, do you ever notice that when report cards survive, they're all A's and B's? Mine didn't survive. Not just saying. Not only did you do things like that, but here's back Allendale again. They were having a spelling bee. Royal Vogelsanger was the teacher. And this was in the evening, and the community was invited to come. This was days before radio. This is 1913, or radio was just starting, I guess. Here's a township meeting where they're pulling all the parents in, and they were having competitions for the kids, spelling, arithmetic, and other branches. Jesse Asper was giving the address. If you remember, I mentioned Jesse's name earlier. Jesse has stopped teaching. He's now the county treasurer. So he's a politician, so he's giving the address. Not everything was academic. Here's somebody who's given a presentation. It's a music presentation. I don't know if any of you had went yourself or had children who went to the high school. This fella is Don Whitlinger. Yes? Yeah. Don taught biology for years. He was a graduate of Garrett Grove. And here's another group of 1st graders. And they're not only giving presentation for other 1st graders, because the 1st graders are all in front of the room, they're giving it for the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, up to 8th grade. Raising money. In this case, they're raising money for the March of Dimes, trying to become part of the greater community. I like this, by the way, for the fact that it gives the addresses of every one of the teachers. Oh, well, everybody knew where I lived, but you can't talk about school without talking about the favorite class. And that's recess or lunch. They just did a survey, by the way, and they said, which do you prefer? And they said almost unanimously recess. That surprised me. I would have thought lunch. Because you have lunch and then time for recess. But lots of things that they did. Now, they were pretty well free. They had an hour to do whatever they wanted. They could go out, leave the campus, so to speak, go into the woods, but they had to be able to hear the bell. You couldn't go so far that you couldn't hear the bell. A lot of them talked about baseball. When I interviewed people, they said, oh yeah, that was one of our favorite games. We all played baseball. I like the story the one told me about third base. They did not have fields like we have today. Uh, so let's suppose the first base is the corner of the building, and second base is the tree stump over there, and third base is the post on the fence on the other side of the road. And I could just see a kid running from second to third, stopping to look both ways before. They also told me they never really had a real baseball or a real bat. They had some sort of a stick that they used. It was more like playing cricket, I think. It was something that had broken off of of a railroad car. They said a brake, and they threw it off, and that's what they used as a bat. And they never had a ball except these things that were covered in tape. I grew up in Philly. That's what we had all the time. They could go fishing. Some of their favorite times were when the teacher said, "Let's go fishing," and everybody would take their lunch break for 2 hours and go fishing. They play tag, marbles. A lot of them told me about a game they played called, and I don't know whether it's pronounced Tiddly or Tidely. Anybody know? No? Okay. And I don't know a spelling. I can't find it in the literature anywhere. I can find the game, but not with that name. Basically, two different groups, one on one side of the building, one on the other side of the building. You had a ball, you threw the ball over. A threw it over to B. If B caught it, they were allowed, the person who caught it was allowed to run around the building and tag somebody with the ball. I see some heads nodding. Okay. And then both of you went back to the side that threw the ball. And then you would throw the ball over. That game was to go on until everybody was on one side or the world ended. And I think that is more likely. Probably more likely recess was over. Education wasn't compulsory. It wasn't compulsory up to grade 8 until later. And it certainly wasn't compulsory from 8 to high school. In the beginning, not very many kids went to high school, but that was all right. There weren't very many of them. At the end of grade 8, you had a choice. You could get a job, or you could attend one of the local high schools. Now, prior to 1957, when Mechanicsburg had an agreement with Sharmanstown and Upper Allen, what was called the jointure. Prior to that point, if you lived in Upper Allen, you had a choice as to where you would go to high school. You could go to New Cumberland, you could go to Dillsburg High School, you could go Carlisle High School. I was reading one account of a woman, a young lady at that point, who said no. She wanted to go to a school with a quality science program. She was going to go to Harrisburg High, which had the best science program at the time. This was, I think, the 1930s. A lot of kids did come to Mechanicsburg. That was relatively easy. It was easy to get transportation in, or if you had to walk, you could do it. So a lot of kids came to high school. About half of the high school up till 1957 was composed of what were referred to as rural kids, kids from the townships. Before you could go to high school, you needed to take a test. The test was administered by the county superintendent's office. It said here that there were 55 children who wanted to go to Mechanicsburg High School from the townships. They had to report on a certain day in March to take this test, and you hoped that you would then receive a letter from the county superintendent. And basically what that letter said, the important part anyway, was that you were certified, recommended, you could go to 9th grade, report to the Mechanicsburg High School. By the way, if you wanted to take go to New Cumberland or Dillsburg High School, you would have taken a test by the county superintendent, same test probably, but would have been graded and you would have been accepted or rejected from those high schools. So it was the same thing. And you were to take that in September of 1950. And I don't know if you can see it from there. Can you see the seal? There is a seal on it. Things begin to change in the 1920s. And I love this picture because it just fits what I want. It shows the road being paved, probably oil being put down on it. But even so, road being paved in front of a one-room schoolhouse. I have no idea where this one-room schoolhouse is. It's in the collection of the Mechanicsburg Museum Association, but we can't figure out what school it is. And I know it's not one in Upper Allen. And the reason I know that is because of the placement. If this were an Upper Allen school, they would all be in front of the building. All the cupolas were in front of the building, not behind the building. But anyway, here's the 1920s, and they're just beginning to pave roads. And we see an article, I found an article in the paper about the Farmers Club favors school consolidation. And this is the Farmers Club, by the way, of Upper Allen. This is the McCormick Farmers Club, Cameron Farmers Club meeting in Rose Garden. And it says at the bottom of it that attending this meeting were the principal and the directors of the Upper Allen Township School. And it said they were in favor of it. This is 1921. They're in favor of school consolidation. Now we come up to 1938. I found another article. And basically, it deals with two townships that are meeting separately. They're not planning on joining, but Middlesex and Upper Allen. And they're still talking about school consolidation. And I love this. It says, the changes could not easily have been made in the days of dirt roads, but the all-weather highways and school buses, the unified township school is so much more superior to the old order, and only the virulent mossback would find fault with the change. 1938, there must have been a lot of virulent mossbacks because the new school doesn't open until 1953. This is the Upper Allen Consolidated School. And it's in, I don't know if you know where this is. If you know where the Upper Allen School is today, it's not that one. It's the one behind it. At one time in Mechanicsburg, there were two schools named Upper Allen Elementary. And they got over that by naming them Upper Allen 1 and Upper Allen 2. People found that confusing. I don't know why. That's how it was when I came to town in the early 70s. They changed the name of Upper Allen 1 to Shepherdstown, and that's what it is today. And I don't know if you've seen it or been in it recently, but this is what it looks like. It's a 75-year-old building, and you wouldn't know it. It was well maintained all the way through, but at the same point, it's a modern. If you go into the more modern schools or the newer schools, I won't say more modern, you'll see that this one is just as modern. Can I take a picture? You want me to wait? All right. This was the original faculty. Now, what happened is that on the Friday before, and this opens on Groundhog Day, by the way, which is why Bill Murray is giving this presentation. The teachers were in the one-room schoolhouse on the Friday before teaching their regular lessons. And then what they did was that Monday, they reported and the kids reported to the new school. And so rather than teaching 8 different classes in a classroom, they taught 1 or at most 2. Now, I know there was something in grades 3. There were more third graders than they could put in one classroom. And so they actually went in with the 4th graders. Anybody know? Nobody's lived through that. I remember reading that, but I can't tell what, and I don't know who the teachers were or exactly what it was, but I sort of remember 3rd and 4th. And of course, 7th and 8th grade was one teacher. So he now had, Mr. Ryder now had 2 classes to teach. Everybody else had 1, he had 2. But remember, the day before he had 8, so he was still doing fairly well. The music teacher who had been going from class to class no longer had to do that. I'm sorry, from building to building. She had to drive her car from building to building. Now she could stay in her classroom and the kids came to her. She probably thought she had died and gone to heaven. By the way, for the record, these 2 are teachers. This is reaching for a name, Westfall, Mrs. Westfall from Garrett Grove and Mrs. Gutschall from Graham School. Those 2 are sisters, and the father had been a teacher in the Mount Allen School. So it was really in the family. In 1953, Upper Allen decides to sell their schools. They didn't need them anymore. They had this new, beautiful school. And you'll notice they sold, I know they sold the Bowmansdale School, went to Wilbert Eccles, and he was a plumber, and he used it to store plumbing supplies. And I know Ruth Baum from Lemoyne bought the Glen Allen building, and she turned it into a home, and that home is still standing. Looks still like a one-room schoolhouse. And it says here, the school also sold the 6 school buildings and the Union Church building that I talked about. So that must have been owned by the school. It's the only time where I see that. But the school must have had possession, which is why they used those plans, I guess. Anyway, I'd like to thank you all for inviting me to speak tonight. I am the archivist, the historian. I have a museum for the Mechanicsburg Area School District. It is open to the public if anybody is interested either in doing research or just coming to see what we have in the museum. You're more than welcome to come. Make sure you give me a call because I'm not there every day. I'm supposed to be retired, my wife tells me, but I'm there most mornings. So if you call and I know you're coming, I certainly will be there. But happy to have somebody come and do that. At this point, does anybody have any questions? That either means one of two things. I bored you to death and you're all sleeping, or I was so good and I don't believe that. So. Question. Let me come back here with the microphone because this is being taped. I'll do my Vanna White bit here.
I'd like to know how many people in this room went to a one-room schoolhouse. My father did.
I was supposed to ask that and I forgot. 1, 2, quite a few. Yeah.
And I was wondering if there are any other teachers in the room besides me. This is my first year not teaching in many. Any teachers?
Teachers?
Thank you.
There's quite a few. There's still, I mean, it hasn't been that old. So, you know, if you were a young teacher, you probably would still be around, or a young student. Did any of you go to the Upper Allen schools? No. Okay. Just curious.
This is just I was at the Simpson Street kindergarten class, and they just built Filbert, and halfway through the year, they moved us to Filbert Street for kindergarten, which is now the Kindergarten Academy.
Mm-hmm.
So I was basically
Yeah.
but I think that's kind of a cool
little bit
trivia.
later, but not very much.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah, let me come.
You were talking about the one-room schools. They were grades 1 through 8.
Mm-hmm.
What year did they expand on those to include the high school years? And did they go to 12th grade?
Upper Allen, as far as I know, never had a high school. They talked about having a high school, but they decided not to. Sharmanstown, interestingly enough, even though they only had 3 grades, they had a high school for a year or two and then decided to not. They found it was cheaper to send their kids to Mechanicsburg than it was to do that. Yeah. And by the way, it wasn't all 8 grades for the entire time. In 57, when the jointure took place, the 6th and 7th, I'm sorry, the 7th and 8th graders went to junior high at Mechanicsburg because they were already paying taxes. So it made sense to do that at that point. Yeah. 1957. Yeah, that was when the jointure took place. And then, of course, in 64, it became 1 school district. Prior to that, it was 3 school districts with 1 high school, which meant the poor superintendent had to go to 4 school board meetings.
Can you comment on the time or the school busing, when that began and the before and after impact it might have had?
Well, I know it started earlier than when they closed the schools. It probably started somewhere around 1940. And the very first school bus that I find is one that it goes to Sharmanstown and picks up those kids and brings them back to the Mechanicsburg School District. They went to high school there, and that bus run worked. I don't know if they had it for Upper Allen or not. I can't imagine they would not have. Now, I know once the jointure took place, they had school buses that would generally go to the site of the old schools. And that's where the kids would wait and then would pick them up from there. It wasn't door to door like we have today, but at least it was better than than having to walk. Let me go back here and then I'll come right back here.
Did kids from any of the Cumberland Valley schools come into high school at Mechanicsburg?
Prior to the opening of Cumberland Valley, yes. As a matter of fact, Mechanicsburg at one time had the largest Future Farmers Association in the state. And when Cumberland Valley opened, all those kids went to Cumberland Valley. They were from the townships out there. And not only did they go, but the teacher went with them. Because he would have been out of a job if he stayed in Mechanicsburg. So he went and retired from Cumberland Valley School District. Yeah. Matter of fact, I have one of the old Future Farmers jackets hanging in the archives right now. That's how I know that.
Correct me if I'm not correct, but isn't there a college also in Mechanicsburg that was a women's college? Okay, so what has happened to that college and a lot of kids that was women's, right? It was a women's college.
Yeah. Irving College, the question was about. Actually, there's a brand new book out about Irving College. I have a copy of it in the archive signed by the author, if you want to come and see it. He is a graduate of Mechanicsburg. He's now teaching in Jersey, living, but he wrote the book about Irving College. The question was about Irving College and starts before the Civil War. I don't have the exact dates, and goes to about 1930, something like that. It was the very first female college in the United States to be a degree granting institution. It was more than just a private little prep school. They had a lot of kids who did music there. Yeah. Matter of fact, if I can tell and this deals with Upper Allen, it's probably the most famous person to come out of Upper Allen Elementary or Upper Allen School District, was a woman who graduated she didn't graduate from Mechanicsburg High School. I can't find her in Mechanicsburg High School graduation list. I find her two sisters. And I know the two brothers go to private school because they were males, and so you had to treat them special. And she never graduated from Mechanicsburg High School, but she graduates from Irving College when she's 20. So what I'm assuming is that she's gone 2 years earlier. She graduates, she wants to get a job in social work because that's her training in college. And Dad says, no, you have to stay and get a real job. So she teaches school, teaches in Bowmansdale for, I think, 2 years. It's either a year or two. And then comes to the high school, teaches English at the high school for a year or two. And I actually have a diploma where she's one of the teachers and she assigned the diploma. Her name is Jane Parker Dieter Rippon. Jane Parker Dieter is her name she graduates under from Irving College. And the reason I mentioned her, well, let me ask this question. How many of you like Girl Scout cookies? She taught in Upper Allen. She was the very first executive director of the Girl Scouts of America. She taught here and she taught at Mechanicsburg High School. So there's a direct link. So if you like Girl Scout cookies, it's not your fault. Any other questions? Yeah, Chris.
Do you know how many students were in each class? Like if they came, did they just keep dividing them up and then and probably there were kids that were missed too, I'm guessing.
Yeah, and there were kids who weren't there on that always happens, but usually not very many. Probably anywhere from 20 to 35. It really depended on the year because they tried to make them neighborhood schools and not move them around. Although there were some times where I heard that they did that because there were too many, we're going to put you in this building. The easiest thing to do would be to take the pictures I have and count the kids. I wouldn't do that, but you could if you wanted to. You can see some of them are fairly large and some of them look pretty manageable. But again, if you're teaching 8 groups at one time, that's a lot of kids to, even if, I know there were some classes, I remember somebody telling me that they were in first grade and they were the only one in their grade. And so the teacher would call them up. And as a first grader, they were petrified to be singled out. Oh, we got one. Do you have a story you want to tell? Mhm.
went from first grade to eighth grade. I was the only student in that class.
Did you graduate a year early?
I wanted to, but they wouldn't let me.
Oh.
They said I would go on to high school. I had to stay another year and then go to high school.
Okay. The, I know there was one example of somebody, well, two examples where that happened to. And one, the teacher said, yeah, they can go on to high school. And the superintendent of the school said, no. But another where the teacher said, yeah, this kid's pretty precocious. She's asked her the material, put her at, and she went, she graduated a year early. So. Oh,
Fairview Township. And when I.
one-room schoolhouse where?
Fairview Township.
Fairview Township.
Oh.
Oh.
Years.
Mm-hmm.
Always tell my students in elementary school, I was the smartest one in the class. Then later I would tell them there were only two of us and the other one was pretty stupid.
I'm not going to go there.
Didn't you mention the Cumberland Valley Institute in Mechanicsburg? Where was that located?
Do you know where the Eberly Orris houses are? The two mirror houses on Main Street? Okay, it was one of those two. I don't know which one. But I know it was one of those two.
The hospital?
There might have been one during the Civil War. I don't know. Questions? Anybody else? Yeah.
I'll just make a comment. My dad was Paul Miller and he went to the Glen Allen School. And he talked about the education was not necessarily the best in those one-room schoolhouses. And you mentioned that test that they had to take to go to high school. He was the first one in his family to go on to high school. And he told me when he took that test, the principal was like, you better not plan on too much here, and, he went on to finish and the principal was so pleased that he made it.
Yeah.
He went on to Central Penn Business College.
Mhm.
He went into World War II,
He was a
went-
pilot.
Wonderful career as
Yeah.
a pilot, yes. So, he would say how he was poorly educated.
Well, one of the things, and again, I interviewed quite a few people, and that was one of the questions I asked, was whether or not you felt when you moved from the one-room school to the big city school in Mechanicsburg, whether you felt prepared. And almost to a person, first of all, the females told me yes. They had no problems moving on, both socially as well as academically. The guys said socially they had some problems because they used to dress country, the bib overalls and all. And until they learned not to do that, they stuck out and they weren't treated very well by the big city kids. But they said academically, they said we were where everybody else was. And I had a number of people that told me why. They said, we heard the same lesson for 8 years. If you hear it as a first grader, and then you hear it repeated, and you're hearing what the eighth graders are getting at the same time, and you're supposed to be working. You're not, how that is. I remember when I was a kid, and they would bring the teacher from another class in to talk about sex ed, and they told the guys to put their heads down and not listen. Oh yeah. Anyway, what happened was that they sort of absorbed the basic knowledge. I know there's one fellow who graduated, and I can't think of his name. I have an article about him. He went on to teach and was part of the Manhattan Project. So I guess he did okay in high school, college and for the rest of it. He was still teaching at over 100 at Messiah. So, other questions? Well, again, thank you all very much for coming. I do have some, thank you. I have a book I've put together up here on the one-room schools, and it's actually pictures of the one-room schools and the students that are in the one-room schools. It starts with A and goes to the end of the alphabet, and then within that group, it's chronological. So if you're looking for somebody in Allenview in 1930, it should be fairly easy to find. I had somebody who came to me at one of these workshops and said, my mother went to one, I wonder.